So the argument here is when you are pitching to clients, when you are trying to persuade people of your merits, it's better to stick to one or two reasons rather than giving people this long laundry list of reasons to believe in yourself. Because if you give them that super long list, you'll weaken believability in the core reason, and you'll reduce credibility in that area.
Welcome to the Agents of Change, the podcast experience you've been waiting for your entire marketing career. Search, social, mobile, AI, blockchain, and neuromarketing. These are the Agents of Change, and so are you. Digital marketing success awaits, and your transformation begins now.
Welcome to another episode of the Agents of Change podcast, the podcast that helps you reach and engage more of your ideal clients. And today, that is exactly what we're going to be covering. My name is Rich Brooks. I'm your host. This is episode 596, powered by Flight New Media. When you can't do it all yourself, add us to your bench. Whether it's updating your brand, building a new website, or driving traffic and conversions, we've been helping small and medium-sized businesses since 1997. No, that's not a typo. That is 28 years of experience. Reach out to us at takeflight.com or theagentsofchange.com, and I'll follow up with you personally. Today, I'm bringing back one of my favorite guests, which is really an unfair thing to say because I have so many favorites who have been on the show. But this guest has a certain je ne sais quoi quality. Maybe it's his easygoing demeanor. Maybe it's his British accent. That always makes people sound smart, at least to us Americans. Or maybe it's his focus, which is neuromarketing and why we do the things we do. We're going to be talking about a lot of ideas that you can implement immediately into your marketing, into your offers, and into your business that will have an incredible impact on your bottom line. So let's get to it. My guest today specializes in applying behavioral science to marketing. He's the author of two existing books on the topic, The Choice Factory and The Illusion of Choice. The Choice Factory is available in 16 languages and won Best Sales and Marketing Book at the Business Book Awards back in 2019. His third book, co-authored with Michael Aaron Flicker, is called Hacking the Human Mind, and it comes out September 2025. In 2018, he founded Astraton, an agency that applies behavioral science to solve marketing problems. In 2021, he was made an honorary fellow of the IPA and an associate of the Mahler Institute, Churchill College, Cambridge University. I'm very excited to welcome back to the podcast, Richard Shotton. Richard, nice to see you again.
Very good to see you again. It's always nice to come back. Can't have done too badly first time round. Yeah,
exactly. And I still want to make it out to London so you and I can have a pint together. I'm looking forward to that.
I like the sound of that. Yeah.
All right. Now, you studied how subtle psychological cues can dramatically change how people think and act. I'm curious to know what first drew you into exploring the connection between behavioral science and marketing.
So marketing came first. I didn't know anything about behavioral science or psychology when I started my career. So when I was working at an agency, one of our clients was the Department of Health. And in Britain, look, varies by country, the Department of Health try and get people to donate blood through altruism. There's no cash payment. And I can remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. This is about 2004, at a time when we had a big brief coming in to encourage people to give blood. And right at the back of that book, there was a really brief discussion of a psychology, behavioral science experiment by an American called Latane and Darley. And they came up with this idea called the bystander effect, which is essentially, if you ask loads of people for help, there is an increased probability people ignore you. There's a diffusion of responsibility. Everyone leaves it up to everyone else. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, we've got these campaigns at the moment where ads are going out saying blood stocks are low in England, please donate. And I thought, well, this is classic bystander effect. We're asking everyone to help, so everyone's leaving it up to their neighbor. So I thought, well, why don't we take this psychology experiment, apply it to the creative? And I went and spoke to a brilliant guy called Charlie Snow down at the creative agency. And I said to him, well, why don't we stop saying blood stocks are low in England? And why don't we try and create a sense of personal responsibility? Let's just tailor the messages a bit more tightly to a geographical area. So he started saying blood stocks are low in Birmingham or East London or Glasgow. And that is a pretty crude application of bias. There's nothing particularly fancy about what we did. But that little tweak, using this insight from psychology, avoiding the bystander effect, the results were impressive. I think it was 10 or 15% improvement in people donating when we did our next bit of tracking. So that was the first experiment that got me excited. And then what really blew my mind was I kind of thought there were just one or two of these studies. When I started looking into it, there were literally thousands of studies run by psychologists. And it seemed to me a very sensible idea to improve your marketing, to try and identify a relevant study and then match it back to the challenge at hand. And basically for the last 21 years, that's what I've been doing. Either taking existing findings or running my own experiments, then applying them to marketing to increase its effectiveness.
Awesome. All right. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your forthcoming book, Hacking the Human Mind. How is this different than your previous books? And out of curiosity, why did you choose to use a co-author this time around?
So the main difference is the first two books, each different chapter in those two books, it starts with a behavioral science principle, like social proof or scarcity or the pratfall effect. And then we talk about the existing evidence, then experiments I've run, and then we talk about the practical implications of marketers. With this book, we really tried to make it even more practical. So we start with each chapter, a little history of an individual brand. So there's a chapter on Dyson, there's a chapter on Five Guys, a chapter on Liquid Death, a little potted history of that brand. And then we look at their success and we think, well, what one or two behavioral science principles helped power that success? Don't completely explain the success. Life's never that simple, but were really important for their success. And then we talk about the implications for marketers. And I think that brand first approach makes it much, much simpler for people to apply the principles. It's always easier for people to grasp an idea when we're using concrete examples. And the reason...
So, keep going.
No, I was just going to say the reason we did it with Michael Aaron Ficker, who's the co-author, is we'd started with a podcast where we'd identify brands and then talked about some of the behavioral science principles. And this just felt like a natural build on that approach.
Nice. All right. Well, what I want to do is kind of talk about some of the chapters in the book, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about how, because, obviously when we're talking about brands like Five Guys, maybe the guys from Five Guys are listening right now, but a lot of the people who listen to this podcast work for small companies or their agencies work. So let's see what we can do to kind of take some of those big brand ideas and kind of narrow it down to something that's any one of our listeners could accomplish, or even I could accomplish on a good day.
Okay.
So let's start with Five Guys. You share the story of them and the goal dilution effect. Can you just briefly explain what is this and why is doing fewer things really well often smarter than trying to be everything to everyone?
So the goal dilution effect is an idea from behavioral science that was first experimented by Zhang at the University of Chicago back in 2007. She does a super simple study, recruits a group of people, and some of them, she says, eating tomatoes will reduce your risk of cancer. And then she asks them how much they think tomatoes will reduce your risk of cancer. She gets another group of people, and she gives them that exact same paragraph of information all about why tomatoes are going to reduce your risks of cancer. But she also says eating tomatoes will reduce the risk of a degenerative eye disease. She then questions that second group as to how good they think tomatoes will be at reducing cancer. And what she sees is even though people have seen the same initial information, she sees a 12% reduction in believability, in kind of belief that tomatoes are super useful for cancer. And her argument is essentially that people have this rule of thumb in their heads that you can't be a master of all trades, that if you claim to do multiple things very well, what tends to happen is those additional reasons are averaging rather than additive. So what I mean by that is if you say you are a brilliant marketer, I might believe that quite strongly. But if you say you're a brilliant marketer and you're quite punctual, well, even though logically that should make you a more appealing character, because punctuality is less of an important reason, it actually detracts from that super strong individual reason. So the argument here is when you are pitching to clients, when you are trying to persuade people of your merits, it's better to stick to one or two reasons rather than giving people this long laundry list of reasons to believe in yourself. Because if you give them that super long list, you'll weaken believability in the core reason and you'll reduce the credibility in that area.
That's interesting. It's almost like what I call the portfolio effect, where it's like you don't want to show all your work. You only want to show the best, most representative, most successful work. The more you show, actually, it seems to dilute everything that you're showing them. And people tend to look at either the medium or the lower end of your work rather than the things that you want to draw their most attention to. And I don't know if this is the same thing, but I remember reading something. I want to say it was Kraft mac and cheese. And when they got rid of the artificial colors and flavors, they actually didn't advertise that for like 2 years because they were sure that once people found out that they had stopped using the glow-in-the-dark cheese additive, that they wouldn't like the taste as much. So they purposely didn't mention it when they actually switched over to the new formula that was healthier, because if something's healthier, it can't taste as good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that they're certainly linked in this idea that people's expectation of a product will actually affect the experience. So if you think a food like mac and cheese or a wine is going to taste amazing, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And unfortunately, especially among Americans and Brits, there is a belief that health food tastes bad. Now, this isn't speculation. There's an amazing psychologist called Raghunathan at one of the Texas universities. And he does this brilliant experiment where he lays out a buffet of Indian foods. He gets people to sample all the foods and then rate them. He ignores all the ratings apart from the ones about the yogurt drink, the mango lassi. And the twist in the experiment is some people, he told them that the mango lassi was a health drink. Others, he say it's an unhealthy drink. And what he finds is the people that hear it's unhealthy, they rate this yogurt drink 45% better than the people who thought it was a health drink. We assume healthy foods are going to taste bad, because frankly, often they do. But that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So even exactly the same product, if it's labeled as healthy, it sets up these negative expectations, and then they affect our actual experience. So yeah, if anyone's a food and drink marketer, be very, very careful about leading with health messages, because what you'll tend to see is, yes, people might increase the ratings in terms of healthiness for your food, but there'll be this equal and opposite detraction in how much they think they'll enjoy your food.
This was not the direction of the conversation I was planning on, but let's kind of play this a little bit further, go down this rabbit hole a little bit more. So if I have a product that's healthy, and I believe in my heart of hearts that it actually tastes delicious, I wonder what the psychological trick I could pull to get people to be like, oh, it could be both. And I wonder if I kind of ran experiments, recorded them, turned them into a video where I showed how people think that if something is healthy, it tastes bad, if that would be one way to kind of nullify that effect. And all of a sudden we'd be laughing at these people who say, oh my God, it must be terrible because it's healthy for you. And then we discover, no, actually it tastes great. If that might be a way to help people overcome that psychological bias and actually try my product.
I think that would be a great one. I think kind of almost leaning into this bizarre finding that reported taste is wildly different depending on the story that goes around a brand. I mean, the other thing you could do is, let's say, I don't know, top of my head, vegan cheese. Let's say it's a vegan cheese you're trying to sell. What often people would do is tell people, oh, it's, it's got lower saturated fat. Now, maybe this is in Costco, we're sampling it. They give you a story about how healthy it is, and then they let you taste the food. What this experiment would suggest is get people to taste it first and then tell them about the health benefits. You want people to first experience your product without any of these negative associations. Or if you are selling a health food, I mean, you don't have to mention it's healthy. You could lead on taste. Nike don't talk about the durability of their trainers in their above the line advertising. They talk about the kind of emotions that go with it, how it's going to make you a superstar, how it's it taps into this whole idea of just do it. Just because a product is virtuous doesn't mean that should be the thing that you lead with. There's some wonderful studies run in cafeterias by Bradley Turnwald. I think he might be at Stanford, but I might get that wrong. He did a study back in 2017 where 7 weeks, he works for this cafeteria and he changes the labels of the food, one day to another. And what he found is if you labeled let's say the green beans, I don't know if you call them something different in America, or the zucchini, if you labeled it as sweet and sizzling, you'd sell far more than if you labeled it low calorie. And focus on appeal before you focus on virtue.
All right. And getting back to your original point, or where this story started with the five guys, is if we're out there marketing our services and we've got 27 reasons why people should choose us, choose our solution, that's not going to work. What we need to find is the 2 or 3 that are going to most resonate, maybe just one, and really narrowly focus on that one. Or perhaps run 27 different ads, each one just focusing on one area of why our product is the best. And we're going to likely, based on this research you've done or seen, we're likely going to have more success that way.
Absolutely. And I think everyone who's listening should recognize that if they are in a company of bigger than one, once you get multiple decision makers, often to keep the peace, marketers will take everyone's opinion, and often an ad will become stuffed full of reasons to believe. This study by Zhang from the University of Chicago suggests you've got to really push against that bureaucratic pressure to keep on adding more reasons. Try and be as single-minded as you can, and you've got the best chance of success.
Absolutely. All right. So we talked about focus. That's one thing. Scarcity somehow seems similar, but it's different. In the book, you talk about Starbucks and, in my personal opinion, the god-awful pumpkin spice movement here in the US and probably elsewhere. They turned it into this marketing phenomenon by limiting its availability. And here in Maine, we see something similar with pumpkin-flavored beers that at least used to only come out around Halloween. Now it's actually like from summer into winter, but we'll get to that at some other point. For those of us who may want to kind of leverage this scarcity, but we do not have a cult product to speak of, how can we genuinely or create genuine urgency without it feeling like it's a gimmick?
Yeah, absolutely. The great thing with these principles is it's not just giant iconic brands that use them. Everyone can use these principles. And I think with scarcity, probably the simplest tactic is next time someone's running a sale, think about purchase limit scarcity. So put an artificial cap on how much people can buy. So whether you're selling soup or soap or beer, if you don't let people take as much as they want, you will boost the appeal and you'll boost sales. So I did a simple experiment. So Michael Aaron and I recruited 282 Americans, and we told them about Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And some people, we said, look, imagine it's on sale at your local superstore for $18.99. How good value do you think it is? And 13.7% of people thought it was good value or great value. We then got a completely fresh group of people. We showed them exactly the same brand, exactly the same volume of beer. It was a 12-pack. We gave them the same price and message, but we said maximum number of cases you can buy is 6. And what we saw was that there was this 59% improvement in evaluation. And now we're up to 22% of people thinking this product is good or great value. Now, this is exactly the same product, the same price, but whether people think it's worth spending their money on depends on whether you put this limit. And what I think is happening here is people are paying attention to the body language of the retailer. They're thinking, if the retailer won't let me buy as much as I want, either this product is such a steep discount they're losing money, or it's so good a deal, they're worried about selling out. They don't want to irritate their other buyers. So it's a completely costless tactic that anyone can apply to the next time they're running a product on promotion. And that's a common theme of behavioral science. These principles don't have to cost you money. A 1 or 2-man band can apply these principles as well as Starbucks or Coke.
Keeping with the beer theme, I remember there's a popular brand here in Portland, Maine called Bizzle Brothers. You should totally check it out if you come to the States. Yeah. And I remember that when they first started, they basically didn't even have a tasting room. But it would be like, I forget if it was Friday or Sundays, they'd release new beers because it was a micro brewery and you were only allowed to get a 6-pack. And people would line up for like a quarter mile waiting for them to open the doors just so they could buy a 6-pack of this beer. And their substance is fantastic. But it's that idea of, if you had made it and it was like as popular or as available as Budweiser, there's something that's lost there. So there is that idea where I have something special. I have something that has, like there's a limited amount because there would be mass appeal otherwise. And I'm also reminded of that awful day early on in COVID where I had to get up at 6 a.m. and go to the supermarket and wait in line to get toilet paper. And I'm like, whatever I do, I'm not going to run. I'm not going to run once I get in there. And then I started seeing every other adult neighbor running. And I said, damn it, I have to run. And I literally had to run to get toilet paper. Not my finest moment. Anyway, but that definitely shows how scarcity, and that was obviously not imposed by the store. That wasn't false scarcity. That was kind of like there was just not enough to go around, or at least people were hoarding. All right. So let's talk about one of my favorite topics, also covered in the book, social proof. So for those of us who maybe don't have millions of fans, followers, and customers, beyond using testimonials and reviews, can you think of or suggest any creative ways that we can demonstrate that we're the trusted or popular choice?
Yeah. So social proof is the idea that if a brand is perceived as popular, it will become more appealing and more people will buy it. Now, as you say, this is one of those principles that's used quite regularly. We've got 10 million customers, or we've got 73 customers. Talking about the scale of your brand is using social proof. But this isn't an interesting bias, because actually the most powerful way to use this principle isn't to directly state your popularity, it's to imply it. So there's an amazing study from 2008 by a Dutch psychologist called Kees Keizer at the University of Groningen. And for his experiment, he finds an alleyway. This is in the Netherlands. Loads of people park their bikes in this alleyway. And crucially for the study, there is no trash can. So Keizer goes down to this alleyway early in the morning, and he puts ads for a fictitious sports shop on the handlebars of the bikes. He then wanders off 10 yards or so, and he really stealthily monitors what do the returning cyclists do. Because remember, there's no trash can. They can't just chuck the flyer away, the ad away. They have to either take it home with them or chuck it on the floor. Now, Keizer sets up this study in one of two ways. Sometimes he goes down to the alleyway super early in the morning and he cleans it up. He makes it spotless. He picks up every single bit of litter. He essentially is making it look like most people take their litter home. And when he does that, just a third of people chuck their litter on the floor, 33%. The other condition, he goes down to this same alleyway on a different day. He goes down really early in the morning, and this time he makes it like a complete tip. Chucks litter on the floor, spray paints the walls with graffiti, makes it look like the norm of behavior is to throw your trash around. And when he does that, there is a more than doubling of littering rates from the returning cyclists. We're up to 69% of people dropping their rubbish on the floor. Keizer's argument is social proof is most powerful if it's implied. Because if you go out and tell people that you're popular, well, people might be skeptical. But if people think they've come to their own conclusion, frankly, who do we trust more than ourselves? So what you want to do as a brand is think to yourself, is my consumption or usership or purchase of the product, is that visible? Because if it is, brilliant, you're harnessing social proof. But if you're invisible, that is a massive opportunity to change. Now, if that all sounds a bit abstract, I'll give you a couple of examples. Think about gin. Now, normally, you go to a bar, you order gin and tonic. Once you've walked away from the bar, no one knows what you're drinking. Consumption of your brand is invisible. So what Hendrix did brilliantly is they made a serve where rather than being over lime or lemon like everyone else, it was over cucumber. So you walk away from the bar, and because your brand is so distinctive and visible, because it's got this cucumber reminding everyone that you're drinking Hendrix, people feel like this is a much, much more popular drink than it is. So the argument here is, if your brand is invisible, you need to make it visible. If it's private, you need to make it public. And if you can do that, then I think you're onto one of the most powerful tactics in behavioral science.
All right. So if we're a small, I'm just thinking about like we put on some small local events. Can you, off the top of your head, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, can you think of some ways in which we could imply this social proof or use this to make it look like the events we're putting on are the best that marketers or owners could go to, or the most popular that marketers and owners are drawn to? What are some of the ways that we could imply this without coming right out and saying it?
Yeah. So let's say you're a small estate agent, or you're sponsoring a local fair. What the estate agents do around me is they'll put up lots of boards saying that this house has been sold by them, or they're sponsoring the fair. It's not that they've gone out and told you it's popular, but because I'm seeing those boards regularly, my assumption is that that estate agent must be the most popular in the area. It's if you're ever in this situation where people wouldn't naturally know that, say, the house next door has been sold by a particular agent. If you can make that sale much more visible, then I think you're hacking people's perceptions of popularity.
So this is really interesting because, lately with these AI overviews that have been taking over Google and destroying traffic to businesses' websites, one of the kind of like underlying currents from some of the thought leaders in the industry have been about getting citations everywhere. So the AI sees you and thinks you're kind of a big deal. But the other thing is getting cited in the AI overviews, even if people aren't clicking through. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. That having your brand show up regularly when people are doing searches on your area of expertise, whether it's marketing, woodworking, gardening, what have you, that starts to build trust. And I wonder if that's something similar to like real estate agents, as we call them here in the state, putting their signs up around places. Yeah. So that's very interesting. And it just kind of continues to reinforce that in this age of AI, that a company's brand and being recognizable, being standing out, being remarkable, as I like to say, is becoming more and more important. Just like it used to be, it's coming back into vogue. This is what we need to be focused on.
Yes. And maybe my example of the estate agent is a bit naff, but maybe a small scale one that would maybe work. Because you mentioned COVID and toilet roll later. The one that the idea that sparked was when people got their vaccinations. Like some vaccination centers, you would go in, you'd get your injection, you'd walk out, and no one would know you'd been vaccinated. What other countries did, and I think France was very good at this, and they've certainly done it for the flu, is you go into some vaccination centers and they get you to wear a badge. So as soon as you're out onto the street, everyone knows your vaccination status. And suddenly it makes it look like everyone's getting vaccinated. And the idea of social proof is we copy what others are doing. So I think that's maybe a better example to explain the principle. Vaccination status is hidden away. Yeah.
Right. And here in the United States and probably elsewhere in the world is you get stickers when you vote. So you go in to vote, you get the sticker, and it's the same thing. It's like, and as people walk out, everybody's like, oh, I need to go vote today too as well. So
yes. So we don't do that in Britain. So it's interesting that some of these ideas are commonplace in one country, not in another. If we in Britain want to encourage people to vote, that would be a brilliant thing to mimic.
Although I do remember when I studied in England for a semester, Red Nose Day, which now I see in the US too, but was such a big thing as a way of raising awareness. Although now I'm blanking. Was it homelessness, comedy?
So Red Nose Day, comic relief. It was started by kind of comedians, and there'd be a TV show with lots of jokes. But the money goes to a whole range of things. Sometimes homelessness, sometimes third world countries. So it's quite a broad, diverse spend.
Yeah, and I remember being there, and like they literally were handing out red noses, which we literally would walk around in because we were college students and whatever. I only got to about half the questions, so we're going to have you come back, Richard. But I want to ask two more questions before I let you go. These will be fairly short. The first one is, if a listener wanted to take advantage of some of what we talked about today, what is one action item that they could do that they could start working into their marketing today?
So if you're going to do one thing from behavioral science, I think it's this principle of make it easy. So in the last 25 years, there have been two behavioral scientists who've won the Nobel Prize for Economics, Kahneman in 2002 and Richard Thaler in 2017. And interestingly, both of them, when they've been asked to reflect back on their career, and they've been asked to say, what is the single biggest finding from all their experiments, they say the same thing: make it easy. Now, when they argue this, it's not a statement of the obvious. I mean, everyone knows that if you make a behavior easier, it's going to happen more often. But what Kahneman and Thaler argue is most people misunderstand or they underestimate the importance of removing friction. We know removing little barriers will have some effect, but they tend to have an outsized, a much bigger effect. So I would argue to anyone who wants to change the behavior of someone else, before you think, how can I motivate that person to change their behavior? Think to yourself, how can I make it easier? So go through the customer journey, identify even the smallest barriers and put more effort into resolving them. And it will tend to have a larger than expected effect. So I think of all the experiments, it's not the most exciting one, but it often has the largest effect. Make it easy.
Awesome. And when I do have you back in the near future, we're going to talk about the reverse of that and why sometimes making things more difficult and adding friction can actually enhance your offering, but people will have to subscribe to the podcast and stick around for that. For
a little nuance there, yeah.
Richard, if people want to learn more about you, check out your work, where can we send them?
So go to any good bookshop or any bad bookshop, frankly. The latest book's Hacking the Human Mind. And then other than that, Richard Shotton on LinkedIn or at Shotton on Twitter. Any of those areas, I'm posting about behavioral science. You won't have to listen to my thoughts on the world in general. It'll always be about behavioral science.
Awesome. And we'll have those links in the show notes. Richard,
Fantastic.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks a lot, Rich. Cheers.
Great content and a lot to absorb. If you missed anything, don't worry, we've got you covered. Just head on over to our website at theagentsofchange.com/596. We've got all the audio, the full transcript, a blog post, and all of the links and notes that Richard shared with us. So again, that's at theagentsofchange.com/596. We all face the same choice. We can keep marketing to how we think people should make decisions, or we can market to how they actually make decisions. Which choice is more appropriate for an agent of change?
Don't miss another thrilling episode of the Agents of Change podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform.